everybody. My name is Shruti Rao, and I am this year's SBC chair. Please join me in welcoming Whitney. Whitney, welcome to Beau's annual Spring Business Conference. We are so excited and grateful to have you here. Would you mind introducing yourself to everyone?
Sure. Hi, I'm so excited to be here. So I'm Whitney Beckett. I was Duke 2004, which looking at you guys now seems really long ago. But in my head, it was not so far. I grew up in Austin, Texas. I came to Duke mostly because it was the warmest, best school that I could picture. I'd gone to a debate tournament in high school at Harvard and had gone in like an unlined J. Crew peacoat and had never recovered from the cold. So this was my place. I was, guess after Duke, you guys gave my introduction, but loved school, have a lot of degrees, started as a reporter, and we'll talk more about that, but really have always loved retail, and I wish I'd had something like this when I was here, because it was very, Duke was very liberal arts, and you had to kind of create your own path with your extracurriculars, which I think is great, but I think having things like this, extracurriculars that are already built for you guys to hear from people and to understand different paths, and it seems like a lot of great recruiting efforts that are set up now that weren't when I was here, or maybe I just wasn't aware of them, but it's terrific and inspiring and very happy to be here.
That's amazing. So Whitney, you started as a history major here, and now you're a digital marketing executive at Cole Haan, but can you kind of walk us through how you got there, and especially the early stages of your career?
Sure. So I was actually an econ major here and very into journalism. So I started a neighborhood newspaper when I was 11 and loved journalism. I was at the Chronicle, was my probably biggest extracurricular activity. I was news editor my junior year, and senior year I was a columnist as well as the fashion editor effectively. And I didn't know what I was going to do after school, but I remember Anna Maria Wilson from Women's Wear Daily at the time was doing the college issue, and she came to interview me as the fashion editor here at the time, and I remember just thinking, this girl is the coolest person I've ever met. Like, what is she doing? I want to do that. And I'd also had the opportunity during that time, Andre Leon Talley, who was an editor-at-large at Vogue at the time, had written his autobiography. And I got to interview him for that because he was from Durham and had that connection, and he'd started at Women's Wear too. So those things were clicking in my mind as a possible career afterwards. So I'd gone to journalism school partly because I knew I was good at school, and that was a logical next step as opposed to applying for a job, say. But I interned at Women's Wear's London Bureau at the end of that, and got the job offer as part of that afterwards back in New York. So got the best education possible from being a reporter. Learned so much about the industry, got to speak to pretty much anyone that I'd ever dreamed I could have. I remember one of my favorite early stories was being at an event for Liz Claiborne at the time, one of the big companies that I covered, and this CEO was being very kind and was Vera Wang was there. He was like, Whitney, would you like to meet Vera Wang? And I was like, absolutely. And she comes over, and you think she's going to be this like really proper woman, right? Like bridal designer. And she looks at me, she goes, you look like you're 9. So anyway, it was a funny story, but it was a fun job. I wrote, because it was a daily, I wrote about 700 stories during my 3 years there, and got to meet so many people and be exposed to so many parts of the industry. And one of the ongoing trends in stories when they were looking for executives was there wasn't enough talent in the industry. And I remember interviewing people and thinking to myself, well, if there's not enough people who could do this in the humble ways that only a 20-something-year-old could think, I'm as smart as anyone I'm talking to. I could do their job. Like, I should go back and do that instead. I bet I'd make more money. So I went back to Wharton, which has a really great retail-focused program that Jay Baker endowed, and really focused singularly on that when I was there, knowing that I wanted to be targeted in retail. So that, I'd say, as kind of a different point from my Duke experience, it had a lot more vocational focus at the time. So did that, and again, I interned at Ralph Lauren in between the summers, which was through the school, like a networking event kind of like here. Met Roger Farah, who was this president at the time, and got an offer to do that. Loved it, stayed there afterwards, and didn't know exactly what I'd be doing. And I went, they were launching Club Monaco's website at the time, so I started with that, which was really wonderful for me. I think it was lucky in the sense that Ralph Lauren's a very big company, and we can kind of talk about like how you choose where you work. But I don't know if it's somewhere I would have been long-term happy with. I loved the culture. I loved that it felt like, you know, kind of back to like Duke days, like almost like a sorority. There was a feeling of, you know, just drinking the Kool-Aid. Everyone really loved the brand and that aspect of it. But you were a cog in the wheel to a little bit. It's so big that it was hard to make a difference. Whereas with Club Monaco, we were launching their website as part of their offshoot, and we really got to make a difference on a daily basis, which I thought was incredible, that I got to be the one who chose what the emails were, or how something looked, and how we were setting it up. But I think the Club Monaco culture in other ways was a little bit less for me. So I was there for about 2 years and didn't love the club part, and ended up being at Cole Haan, which I love. I think in a similar way to Club Monaco, it's an established brand that had to do something new. So we were bought by Apex from Nike about 4 years ago now, and are very much in turnaround mode. So going into the website and getting to change things every day. And I feel like that even 4 years later, we're still in turnaround mode, and it's still a lot of fun, and still get to say, you know, when an email comes out, or we have a promotion, or we have, you know, a new shoe we're really standing for. Those were all decisions I got to make, which it feels really exciting.
So, you know, you've had so many different shifts throughout your career at so many different places, and even working so many different roles within retail. So, how did you navigate that throughout your career? And did you know, was it after you did the retail program at Wharton that you knew you wanted to be in digital? And kind of how did you navigate that whole process?
So, what I knew is I wanted to be in a growth area, and I think that to me was either digital or international. I think those are the two places that things are happening. And I got lucky, frankly. I had met at Wharton has a board for retail, and the CEOs of all of those companies from the board would come, and I got sat next to Roger Farah, and he connected me with his chief of staff, Robin Mitchell, who had her MBA as well, and was a very passionate mentor, which I felt incredibly lucky for that connection. And you know, she was talking to me, and she said, "What part do you want to be in?" And I was like, "Oh, I don't really know. A growth area." And she was like, "Well, I like digital. I think you should do digital." And I was like, "That sounds great." And I was really lucky because, you know, as I look at my career and as it's kind of gone on, Cole Haan's done restructuring lately in a way that I think probably every company has, that you have to be digitally led. You know, when I was even at Wharton, the kind of best-in-class companies were just, you know, barely cracking 10% for digital. And now pretty much everyone's at least at 20. The thought is the industry will get to 30. And if you don't have that, knowing that it's your flagship, it's the biggest part of your business, you don't have the skills to succeed. And so I think having those digital skill sets early on was really critical in the analytics that accompany it.
So when you talk about this kind of, you know, this digital transformation, it's something that, you know, we've already discussed tonight, but, you know, how exactly does that impact Cole Haan, and Cole Haan being a really versatile brand, having, you know, being a really unique brand in that 50% men, 50% women. How does that impact the way you think about digital? What is your role in terms of thinking of the future and shaping where Cole Haan is going to go?
Yeah, so we actually restructured about 6 months ago, and that's when I went from being just in charge of our digital buying and merchandising to our whole direct-to-consumer business, including the stores. And I think the thought at that point was, what's driving the ship isn't the way we used to think. We shouldn't start every meeting with marketing talking about what the store windows will be. We should talk about what the homepage of the website is going to be. We should be thinking about what kind of products we need to move the needle for that customer. So that really, to be frank, my boss got eliminated in that restructuring, and I think it's because she didn't have the digital experience and wasn't willing to shift into that. So I feel very lucky that that was where my career started out, to layer that on, because you see people trying to get that now, which you certainly can in companies. Like, it's growing so much. I think it's a willingness to take on that skill set. And the way it's different is digital is very analytics based, right? We have access to information that we wouldn't have had just from a store perspective. You know exactly how long people were on site. You know what your conversion rates are. You know where the traffic's coming from, where the traffic's going afterwards. You know what they're searching for. You know if they're bouncing quickly from a product. You know if a product is underexposed on the site, but it has really great conversion, and people get to that and what that means. So you know so much more, and I think we're using those analytics. Another girl who actually went to Wharton with me and started the same day at Cole Haan is in charge of our analytics, and that's an incredibly powerful role in a company. Like, if you can be the master of analytics, you're the master of many things, and I think we're very analytics based. And so when you talk about like the dynamics, Cole Haan's is interesting in the sense that we're 50-50 men's, women's. We are 50-50 wholesale, direct to consumer. We're 50-50 from a full price business perspective, digital and stores. So all of those aspects create interesting dynamics. One is, how do you talk to your customers? How do you, put a product on your homepage that appeals to both men and women? A lot of times we do that and it appeals more to men. We have products that are dual gender, but usually they'll skew more one way or the other. How do you balance that? How can you learn more about your customer from a CRM perspective so that you can segment your emails, talk to people very specifically? And then just from the web and how people can search now. If wholesale is a huge part of your business, how do you make sure that you are maintaining price across the marketplace, that your segmentation has integrity? Nordstrom is our biggest wholesale account, and they're very sensitive to brands seeming like they're promotional, to not being full price. And at the same time, Macy's is our second biggest, and Macy's is promotional every day. So if you have both of those going on, how do you make sure that the product that Macy's is on is not the product that Nordstrom's on, while still running a line where your best products can be your most productive products? And how do you manage that? So I think I lead a lot of those negotiations and kind of help in the marketplace.
So you talked about working with Nordstrom, these different wholesalers, and so how do you think about being at Cole Haan, working for a brand, thinking about the rest of the shoe industry or just the rest of the fashion industry? How much do you look outside what Cole Haan is doing and what your competitors are doing? Would you say it's a very outward-facing kind of a role that you have in terms of watching the rest of the industry?
Yeah, I think any brand at this point, you have to be very aware of what's going on. We definitely do marketplace shopping. So a trend person will be out looking at what other people are doing from a trend point of view. From a digital point of view, we monitor what other companies are doing from a promotional cadence. Is our friends and family rate competitive? Are other companies being more promotional this year? Do you have to do that to compete, or are companies starting to pull back? And monitoring that whole aspect, and just being sensitive to your wholesale partners. You want to win everywhere that you are. So I think that's very critical.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you've been at, we've talked about this before, being at different firms and being in different roles, but what have been your major takeaways from fashion is such a big and such a diverse industry, and I think it often gets pegged as being kind of PR, marketing, certain kind of thing, but what were the different cultures and the different organizations, and kind of how did you learn what to look for in a company or an organization to join?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think it's really my biggest advice that I always have in talking to people thinking about entering the industry. What kind of thing, you should always go after what you're passionate about. Like, are you passionate about finance? Are you passionate about product and want to be on the merchandising or even design end? Are you passionate about marketing? Are you passionate about PR and that buzz? Are you passionate about product creation? Not the design aspect, but like dealing with the factories and the sourcing and the details. So there's lots of different things, and I think finding what you want to do and what doesn't feel like work to you is number one. But then I think it's really smart to find a company that values that. There's companies that value product above design above all else. There's product companies that value marketing above all else. I'd say there's companies that value merchandising. Club was a very merchant-driven company where the merchants were, kind of a merchant king was who was in charge, and only the merchants really kind of got to speak in meetings and have.
For those of us who aren't as familiar with fashion language, what exactly does that mean?
Merchandising. Yeah, so the merchandising role, I truly, even like when I took a merchandising job, I wasn't entirely sure what it meant. It's the person that is kind of the liaison with design. So design, in theory, you want them to be able to be creative, to see what's next in the industry, to really do that. But the merchant is the one on the other end saying, okay, that's great, I believe in you, but we've got to make this, we've got to hit this price point. I need this many I need this many colors of this pattern to, comp what we did last year in the same pattern. I need it to be, I know my customer really responds to novelty, so I need some great prints. What really worked in this is, this lace. Do we have some sort of detailing like that? But still keeping it under budget, saying, I know we need to hit a 75 IMU, initial markup. How do we do that if, will the customer pay, if this lace costs us $1, will the customer pay us $4 for it? Or am I not going to get paid back for that, so I should take this off? So that's one part of merchandising. The other part is buying. So that's the other counterpart. In some companies, vertical company, they're often one and the same. The merchant and the buyer does the same thing. But Cole Haan's a company where buying and merchandising is separated out. And I'd say as compared to the merchant who's working so closely with design, a buyer will be the person largely looking more at the analytics, a little bit more of the what do we need to comp from last year? What do we need to drive our business? How do we need to, perform in season, and putting units to it? What's a good comp to this style? So that's what merchandising is. But at any rate, I think you need to figure out what kind of company values what you're doing. I think that sets you up for success, because if you're at a company that doesn't care at all about merchandising, where it's all about the marketing aspect, I think you'll sometimes feel like maybe you don't have the best mentors there. Not always. I think you can succeed in any company, but I think that sets you up for success. And I'd say that's a big thing to think about. Figure out what drives different companies. I'd say Cole Haan, interestingly, is one of the few companies I'd call really strategy or even a little bit finance-based. We are owned by private equity, which probably sets us up for that. And it's also a company that has a lot of MBAs, which is pretty rare and good fit. I think there's companies that definitely almost see that level of analytics as kind of number crunching. But I think, the reality of today is that you need to have that to succeed.
Absolutely. That's so interesting. So I think my last question to you is, what are the most important lessons that you feel like you've learned throughout the course of your career? And for this audience of primarily Duke students, what advice would you have?
Absolutely. Okay, I wrote some things down for this. So first I'd say do what you're passionate about. This is your time in life to take classes, learn about anything. Truly, 2 years out of school, no one cares what your major is. So what class do you want to take? You find that, a history of, oh gosh, I'm blanking, but I took a history of genocide class that I found really fascinating. It's sort of a downer. But when I was at Duke, that has nothing to do with my career now, but it made me a more thoughtful, interesting person when I consume news and media and things like that. Take classes like that. In your free time, college is a lot of fun, so have a lot of fun, get it out of your system. But I think at the same time, you want to make sure you're doing extracurriculars. If you're really passionate about this group, get involved with that. I loved my time at the Chronicle. I learned so much, I got exposed to so much. I really actually loved, my husband cringes every time I say this, but I loved what I did with my sorority. I was social chair and rush chair, and I found it a lot of fun. It was a great creative outlet. Have fun, do those things, and do what you're passionate about before doing what you think fills out a resume. I think that always feels really inauthentic. So that's number one. 2, internships, how to treat internships. I'll give you a little bit less on how to get them, but more how to treat them. I was hired, 2 out of my 3 jobs were because I was interning there first. It's a prolonged job interview. I manage interns every summer, and what I would say is no job is too small for an intern. I got out of journalism school. I had my master's, and I remember my first job at Women's Wear Daily when I was an intern was burning CDs of the fashion shows. And they were like, this will probably take you 2 weeks. And I was like, dear God. Okay. And I did it in 2 days. And then they had to give me other more exciting work. But I did it with a really good attitude, and I was the best CD burner you've ever seen. So I think approach everything you're passionate about it, you're not above anything, and your job is to help. And if you're interested in retail, it's hard to maybe show that from, there's not classes at Duke that have that specifically. One way you can always tell that someone's interested in retail, you worked at a store. That's a really great way. I know it's probably not something most people have done. Frankly, I didn't do it until I was at Wharton. And I said, I can't be taken seriously of applying to jobs in retail if I haven't worked at a store. And I will say that helps me so much in my job today when I'm talking with our visual teams about setup, or we're trying to understand how disruptive it is to put markdowns out on a day of the week that's not normal because we haven't planned for payroll on those days. Or why is this product not working? Is it on the floor yet? That's always the first question. So I think understanding that. And then I'd say the last thing, which was my cautionary tale from coming out of Duke, I feel like I had really good word skills. I always love when people say they had Word, they can use Word on their CV. Yeah, obviously you can use Word, but Excel skills. The girl on my team who I love more than anything in the world was a Wharton undergrad when I was an MBA, and she has the most amazing Excel skills, and you have to today. You have to be able to use the analytics that you can get from retail as you're expected to. You need to be able to do pivot tables, VLOOKUPs, advanced Excel skills, and be incredibly comfortable in those. So take classes where you'll use them, or figure out how to do it in your free time. I think I would be very hesitant even to take in an intern who wasn't good at that, because so much of my job, even a creative job in theory, is in Excel.
That's awesome. Everyone please give Whitney a huge round of applause.